Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lisa Young, and I am a professor and director of graduate studies at the University of Calgary School of Public Policy. Before I start us today, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. So, Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. The School of Public Policy is known for our practical and focused policy research, as well as bringing people together to discuss relevant and timely issues, which of course is what we're here to do today. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our online Policy in a Pint. We are going to be talking about the 2020 US election with a panel of experts. And in the spirit of public houses for centuries, leaving a lot of room for debate and disagreement. After our panel discussion, we'll have the opportunity for a Q&A, and then we'll ask you all to join us afterwards for a post-webinar exchange to have a broader, more informal discussion. So without any further ado, let me welcome our panelists, and we'll dive into this enormous topic. First off, I would like to welcome the School of Public Policy's own Dr. Jean-Christophe Boucher, who's an assistant professor in the school, as well as in the Department of Political Science at the University of Calgary. We also have with us Dr. Mary Lovely, who's a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute and a professor of economics at Syracuse University. And Dr. Sui, an associate professor in the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University. So welcome to all of our panelists, and I'll get you to turn your video on so that our audience can see you. There we go, okay. So when we met to prepare this panel, we all agreed that we would simply move forward to January 20th. We're not going to talk about what might happen in between now and the 20th, but we are going to assume that we are here to talk about the Biden presidency and that it will start in an orderly fashion on January 20th. If anyone in the audience wants to question that, we can definitely do that in the more informal part of our panel later on. But what we really want to talk about is Canada-US relations and what the Biden presidency means. So I'm going to start with an opening question here. Tell us what you think that the Biden presidency means for Canada-US relations in an area that you think is important. And maybe I'll start here with Mary.
So the area that I chose was climate change. And I think that we're going to see President-elect Biden moving forward on climate change right away. So a lot of people have said that, of course, the COVID crisis has to take precedent. In fact, we have a New York Times article just out right now that a 250,000 Americans have died from COVID-19. So living in the States, I have to say it feels like many of my fellow citizens just really don't take this very seriously. So it's still a very divisive issue. It's an issue that requires some new approaches to governance, because clearly we have not got it under control. So, but will that block President-elect Biden from moving forward on things that he promised in his campaign? And I think that the answer to that is no, it can't be. He has also highlighted economic inequality, and I think we'll see him paying attention to that, as well as reinforcing the mechanisms of democracy in the United States, things like the Voting Rights Act. So I think we're going to see him also trying to move forward on that. Now, having said that, we're still waiting for a runoff in the state of Georgia that could determine the outcome of who's got leadership in the Senate. And it's very possible that President-elect Biden will face a Republican Senate and a Democratic House. And a Republican Senate would clearly tie his hands on the climate change issue. But there are many things that he can do and would do, I think, right away. So one of the things would be, of course, taking a whole of government approach to climate change. This would mean having all agencies, programs, departments of the federal government preparing plans for climate change, including, most importantly, I think, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, transportation, and defense. President Biden said very recently in the final debate, and I quote, "The oil industry pollutes significantly. It has to be replaced by renewable energy over time." And I'm sure that's of great interest in your parts. So I think we're going to see a move to take some steps that probably the fossil fuel industry won't like, but it would only be through these actions that he can take by executive order. He can certainly roll back a lot of the environmental regulation rollbacks that the Trump administration, by some counts, the Trump administration had 160 rollbacks of environmental regulations, most of them focused on energy, in particular fossil fuels. So there's a lot he can do there. There's a lot he can do by tucking in pro renewables or pro solar or pro electric into, like, electric vehicles into an infrastructure bill, for example. So he can tuck things into bills that would otherwise be popular and difficult for the Senate to work against. So there are ways that he can do this, and I think we're going to see that climate change as one of his signature items right from the get-go.
Great, thank you so much. Next, I'm going to go to Sui and ask about trade policy. I'm guessing that that's where you're going to put your focus.
That's right. The Biden administration has a good relationship and much better than the Trump administration with the Canadian government. I think that means stability, probability between US and Canada. And I believe trade policy will be more consistent. There'll be healthier communications between the two governments. And I hope the US will be more constructive toward international system and institutions such as WTO. Just a reminder that one WTO, Trump administration rejected WTO dispute report, for the US-Canada soft lumber trade disputes. Okay, but just saying that, I think there's things might not go exactly the way as we hoped. First, I don't think tariffs are just going to go away. And you look at Biden's campaign pledge, it talk about still support US jobs, made American plan. And Biden promised to create millions of manufacturing jobs in the US. Biden recognized that it is the Americans actually who are paying for the tariffs. But I think just not much political uprise for the Biden administration to reduce the tariffs, such as, steel alumni. It doesn't look good for him in the US, has highlights or tariff being removed. And I think there still could be trade wars. I think lots of people say, oh, there's no more trade wars, Trump's not there, but I think there could still be trade wars. And my reason is that, if Biden promised, because he promised to support American jobs, and he, I think he offered during his campaign to offer federal supports subsidized to some of the key industries. And that, could, cause other countries to, have dispute to the WTO. And I think that'll be a dilemma for the Biden administration. And, I think, we're not going back to the pre-Trump year of free trade. We're not going back, there's, these things are very different. Also, we are under pandemic, although there's vaccine coming up, but still, I think the key task for the Biden administration is to, create jobs, create manufacturing jobs, invest in the U.S. economy, infrastructure, treat U.S. Workers, and I think that is the most important. Stimulate economic growth. I think people are going to compare all those numbers, to what is right now with the Trump administration, and I think the Biden, campaign is that the Biden team recognize there's, this call for help in the U.S. and their people needs all the support. And I think for him, this is his first priority rather than, I just have free trade. So that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think it would be difficult for trade relations to be any less stable than they were over the last 4 years. And talking about stability, I'm going to go to you now, JC, to talk a little bit about security.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone has a beverage and kind of like make this, like as a good Wednesday evening. I was asked to focus on national security, which is my area of expertise, and think about like how would like a Biden administration shape Canadian national defense priorities and what it would look like. The last couple of years under the Trump administration has been characterized by a couple of things. On the one hand, Trump has been willing to aggravate some of the tensions around the world with China, with Iran, and that has created a lot of instability around the world. Right now, in the last couple of days, the Trump administration has decided to pack up in Afghanistan and different parts. The military are extremely good at dragging things out, and I don't think it's going to go as fast as the Trump administration hope it's going to get before the Biden teams comes in. But for sure, that's going to leave a vacuum in Afghanistan and a part of the Middle East that will be interesting. Also, the Trump administration has been not entirely good at making friends or keeping the friends it has. It has aggravated NATO allies in Europe, thinking that NATO is some sort of a protection racket, like the Italian mob in New York, where we'll you give us money and we'll protect you, and that's not exactly how that system is designed. So there's a lot of hope and a lot of optimism in Europe and in Canada about like how that Biden team would make it different. And I think there's from sometimes it's harder to have the friends we have than the enemies we have, and I think this is what's going to happen with the Biden team, where because of the closeness between the Trudeau government and the Biden teams, and like Canadians in general and their aspiration toward like a Democrat president, it's going to be harder to say no to a U.S. president that is closer to our values. And there's going to be clouds. I think, like Sui said, there's going to be clouds in the air on the security front. On the first hand, the Biden's team, and as he was a candidate, was clear in making the argument that the relationship with China would not go back to zero. In fact, one of the strong criticisms they've made of the Obama years was the fact that when Obama did the Asian pivot in 2008, they kind of forgot to keep at it in 2013 as the Russians were coming in Ukraine, and kind of lost their eyes on the ball. And that's why like the Biden team has said quite strongly that China will be our main adversary. They'll be our main problem. We have to re-engage in the Pacific. And in some ways, we're going to continue what the Trump administration has been doing, like refocusing on China, refocusing on the danger of a rising China out on the Western Sea. So for Canada, that creates an interesting debate, as we're going to ask to kind of increase our involvement in that kind of Chinese relationship. We're not going to go back to the kind of stability that we had. The next couple of years will still be unstable until the United States and China find a way to sort out their relationship. The next problem we'll have is that as the Biden team wants to re-engage with allies, there is this hope from the Biden team that they can nudge their allies to do more, right? To take ownership in different kinds of things, and to let the allies kind of run the show a little bit. So, and this is what we've seen in the Obama years, somewhat in the Trump years, and Biden will keep on it. There's an expectation that US allies will do more. And that means for Canada, more money, more involvement in an environment where we're starting to look at our pockets and see whether there's money left to do other things. The last problem, the third one, will be NORAD modernization. So the Canada has increased its budgets on military expenditure somewhat, and the Trudeau government didn't think to put money aside for the modernization of North American defense. In essence, we have to completely revamp our radar system, our interception system. There's talks about Canadian involvement in ballistic missile defense. There's really billions of dollars that are not yet planned within the budget. And we've heard from the Biden team that they want Canada to pay more in terms of the defense of North America. That means more investment in national defense in an environment where it's not clear that we're going to get. So we're going to get a lot of pressure from the Americans to do more. And that's going to be an interesting conundrum for Canada, where although there is some sort of willingness to do more, at least at the military front, and at least in terms of military expenditure, it's not clear that it's going to match up the Biden's administration hope. So the next couple of years will still be a years where we manage expectation. I see this as a like for the economists. I have two economists on my, so that's gonna be, it's gonna be like a mini-max relationship. How can we minimize the maximum the Americans can ask the Canadians to spend on national defense? And that will be like an entire strategy for the next couple of years.
Great, thank you so much. Now, the one issue that hasn't been mentioned yet, and I know, since we are having this conversation in Calgary, so to speak, we really have to ask the question, what does the Biden administration mean for the Keystone XL pipeline? Who can I pick on there? Mary, would you jump in?
Yeah, sure, I guess. I don't live locally, so I do, this is important to Calgary. I think that the Biden administration can't pursue its stated policies toward climate change and support the pipeline. And so I think that's going to be a disappointment for some people. There has been suggestions that there could be some way to negotiate this, some horse trading that can be done, and that's possible. It's always possible. But it would be viewed, I think, very negatively by some people who were very influential and very supportive of the Biden presidency. So I think it's going to be very difficult to see how that's going to work in the favor of the pipeline.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So next, I want to go around the table again and ask what your biggest fear is for the Canada-US relationship under Biden. And maybe I'll reverse order here. Maybe I can start out with you, Sui.
All right. So do you mind add a little bit about the Keystone, that project?
Oh, absolutely. Jump in on Keystone. Yeah.
Sure. Because I have friends, in Calgary, and they work in the industry, and this project matters so much for their business and also the livelihood of their family, the future of their family. So it's definitely on my heart. And, I think it's less likely than the Trump administration. For Trump administration, you said, oh, we use the US made, in the US part of the construction, he's happy because it creates jobs, stimulates, economy. I think for his administration, the probability of leaking contamination is 0. And but from the Biden, you definitely he played care about climate change, but he has this issue to create jobs, and we are in pandemic, we in recession, so he has this need to grow the economy. So I think there's a chance, and I think is how we position this project. And I think we cannot say, oh, the probability of leaking contamination is 0, but we can have a scientific analysis, show what is the probability is. For economists, we do the cost benefit analysis. Everything has a cost, everything has a benefit. And the decision we make is based on whether the benefit is higher than the cost, right? And I think we need to make it very transparent, very scientific, and also whether we have planned strategy to prevent the leaking contamination. And that matters so much for people, live where the construction will be. And I definitely understand that. And but also, is there a strategy if it happens? Can we remove the oil quickly? Can we deal with the issue quickly? And I think have very detailed plan. Evaluate the probability, have a strategy to what to do in the disaster situations. And I think that to make things more transparent to and maybe, that's better way to, let US government, the Biden administration decide rather than completely think about the cost, and there's, think about the benefit of it and wait, have weight on the decision, so create the probability for the project to carry on. But I also think, we have lots of technology, and we can think about what we can do to prevent leaking, prevent contamination, actually, makes the project benefits much higher than the cost.
Yeah. And that's obviously going to be a really important case for both the government of Alberta and the government of Canada to be on the same page with when they go to Washington to speak to the new administration. So we've got about 4 minutes left or 5 minutes left before we open things up to questions. And I will encourage people to use the Q&A box to put their question in. But maybe what I'll do is go around the panel and ask for sort of a quick set of thoughts about your greatest fear, but also your greatest hope for Canada-US relations under Biden. So maybe I'll reverse order this time and start out with you, JC.
All right, that's a good question. I think in the grand scheme of things, at least on national defense, I mean, we've been lucky on national defense where a lot of the Canadian-US relationship is, like below the water level of the iceberg. A lot of our connections with DOD, there are a lot of things that are happening without the White House being involved in it. And so although the Ottawa-Washington link was never that good, even on national defense, the relationship between the Department of National Defense and DOD has always been really good, and the interrelations is really interesting and productive. What I'm hopeful for like a U.S. administration that will look toward its allies and listen to the allies and what they have to say to that table. That's going to be an interesting thing where it seems like in the U.S. there's still this hope, at least in the blob, that the Americans can set the expectations and the allies can essentially meet these expectations, right? A little bit, and there's a paternalistic view of that kind of relationship. There's a hope that the Biden team will, reverse this a little bit. And if you want the allies to pay more and involve themselves more on national defense, then you'll have to listen to what they have to say on these issues. And sometimes, go where the allies want to go and not set the standards right now. And so a lot more better cooperation, maybe a better ear in Washington. I'm not expecting for glitter dust and unicorns, but I would settle with glitter dust. But I think like that relationship will be just a little bit easier. In the grand scheme of things on national defense, the Americans are set on a course that is getting more dangerous. And we need more and more Washington and the allies to find a way to navigate this. It's not a one-sided thing either. The Chinese have a tendency, or the Chinese government has a tendency to portray itself as the victim of everybody else's policies. And it seems as if they're not themselves in control of whatever they're doing. And unless we have a Chinese government a little bit more willing to entertain the idea that others might find their behavior reprehensible, then whatever the Americans are doing will still hit like that relationship will go worse than it was.
Okay, thank you for that. Sweet, can I come to you now for
Yes.
greatest hope and greatest fear?
Okay, I agree with JC. I think there'll be more collaboration. I hope I'm sure any administration, U.S. administration will treat Canadian much better with more respect and more collaboration. I guess I would talk about the fear also. That things I think it's also hope. I think Biden's trade policy sounds a lot like President Donald Trump's trade policy. Although they didn't say out American first, it sounds like mostly American first. Right, with the global value chain, there's so much production integrate, in between Canada and the U.S. I think at least they should have this, most American, but some Canada, and I hope they will work with Canada, build more resilience, global value chain, and develop key sectors in both countries because this is beneficial for both countries. But I'm worried about because the pressure of pandemic and recession, and also because they need stimulate money, government revenue, they might think only US, not Canada. So I hope it will be US mostly first, but also think about allies like Canada and have a strategy to engage both countries.
Okay, thanks for that. And we'll give the final word here to Mary from her position south of the border.
So I would have to say I disagree with on the view that Biden's Trump administration looks like Trump's. Trump's was a complete, almost repudiation of the way U.S. trade policy had been conducted up to that time. There was no sense that trade was win-win. It was clearly win-lose, and the U.S. had to win. And I even though the Biden administration is talking about things which clearly do not show a great embrace of trade or an understanding of the gains from trade theorems, I think we're going to see a very different approach. The Biden team must be well known to many of the Canadian government and the diplomatic corps and the military, since many of them have experience in the Obama administration, have been around for a while. I think you're going to see a much more experienced team. I think you're going to see a presidency that actually understands and supports diplomacy, something that the USMCA is behind us. Many of us felt that the USMCA had some good parts, but it also could have done more in terms of liberalization. That's behind us. Now we have to think about what we can do together. And I think you're going to see, we hope, and I think there's signs that the US will re-engage with the World Trade Organization. I think that'll make it easier for Canada. We can get perhaps a seating of Dr. Ngozi as the Director General. We can maybe begin to appoint some judges to the appellate body. We could get perhaps some, there really has been no successful negotiating round in such a long time. We need some plurilaterals or something to begin to create some positive energy, and that's possible. We could do it around medicines, on e-commerce, so sort of a coalition of the willing, if you will, if you want. And I think US and Canada would be on the same side. Another thing that I see, I hope, is a much closer relationship with Canada, between Canada and the US and its approach to China. And here I disagree with JC. I don't think that Biden sees China as our number one enemy. I think he's listed Russia in that role. I think that they have explicitly said that they want to compete with China as opposed to confront China. And I think that's a very big difference. I think that the Americans could do much more to support. Now, I am not privy to any special diplomatic information, but I think we need to see much closer relationships between the two countries if we're going to settle the issue of the two Michaels. I think this is something that has to be done. And the Canadians need to feel the full support of the Americans, because clearly, we were part of this and we're in this now together, and we need to, then something needs to be done. I think you're going to see a US administration that's more reinvigorated on human rights issues, and there'll be some in Canada that welcome that. That will also, however, bring more conflict, I think, between China and the US. As the US pushes issues having to do with Xinjiang or Hong Kong, that will pose perhaps some difficulties for China. I'm sorry, for Canada. So I see it moving in a different direction. We're going to be dealing with, I think, some issues that we both will agree are improvements. I think we're going to have an improvement in the atmosphere, the working relationship between the two countries. But still, we know it's a tough international environment out there, and there's going to be challenges in the relationship.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go to one of the questions from our audience now. And I think this is probably for you, JC, but if others want to jump in, that's fine. On the security front, what position will Biden take to the Arctic, to ports, and to the right of passage on international waterways?
That's a good question. And I had to Google it and like what did Biden say on Arctic issues? And we remember that like the Trump administration had put into question whether or not the rites of passage in was a thing or not, and to the great consternation of Canadians, which like that was the issue where like we understand and we disagree, but we're not going to talk about it, kind of thing. And the way I think we're going to see this is probably a going back to the Obama years, where they saw the Arctic issue much more into a climate change framework than any other kinds of framework. And in this context, they're going to be concerned about drilling in the Arctic and these kinds of things, which will like fit within Canada. What I find interesting in that question is that I know with talking to people at NORAD, and the last time I was at NORAD, was that the entire US NORTHCOM and the entire NORAD are thinking about how they're going to redesign their entire system, much of which is actually in the Arctic. And so a lot of that conversation about the US positioning in the Arctic involves essentially Canada in trying to promote these kinds of things. The Trudeau government hasn't been super active on the Arctic issues. To be honest, we haven't. There's not a budget line yet on how much this will cost, and that means that if the Americans are pushing back on climate change, which is fine, but also nudging the Canadians to do more on NORAD modernization, that means Arctic cooperation, doing more, and that's going to be a challenge for Canadians, both fiscally and also for the Canadian Armed Forces, which might be asked to do more on the Arctic, which is never a good thing. If anyone has been in the Arctic where it's cold and dark, like not a lot of people want to spend like 6 months there. So, and I've heard questions about radars, about sensors underwater that we need to renovate. We also need to buy new submarines to go under to actually patrol the Arctic passageways, which we haven't been able to do, but the Americans are doing without telling us that much. So on the Arctic issue, it's going to be collaboration, climate change, probably pushing Canada to do more, which won't be kind of easy to do.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we've got a couple of questions here about Keystone XL, and I'm going to throw them both out to the panel. So bear with me, there's two different questions here. The first one is, how much currency might Canada's climate change policies on methane management, carbon pricing, and the forthcoming clean fuel standard, for example, carry weight with respect to Keystone XL? So if we're on the right side of these kinds of policies, will it help with getting Keystone XL approved is one question. And the second question here is, on Keystone XL, assuming Biden does cancel the presidential permit, will he offer any compensation to TC Resources, the company that has spent money, billions on construction? And if not, will TC Resources sue for compensation? Now that might be beyond what our panelists can answer, but clearly there's a lot of interest here in the Keystone XL. So I think that this question of how best to make the case and what happens if in fact the Biden administration does cancel the permit.
I guess I can start. There's no question, I think, that in a lot of ways Canadians have been better stewards than the US. I'm just afraid that that's not going to change the political calculus. So, as somebody who's been binge watching reruns of The West Wing, we have to ask, really, what's in this for the president, the president-elect to change this? And I think it's very hard to see how this adds up to something that it's a win for him. He's not going to get much support, or he's not going to change the obstinate attitude of the Republicans in Senate. So he's not going to get much through unless they're willing to trade something away for it. So that may be part of the answer. What are they willing to trade to get it? Without that, saying Canadians are good people and we love them is just not going to get Biden the vote, help him in the midterms, which are coming up in 2 years.
Any of the other panelists want to jump in on this? Okay.
Question about suing. Yeah, I imagine they will sue, but whether they'll be successful is you're going to have to get somebody from the Faculty of Law.
That's right. Clearly, we've got the agenda for our next policy in a pint, right? So we'll keep our panel in the area of their expertise. We've got a couple of questions here that relate to sort of the broader international environment and Asia in particular. And so the first question is short and sweet. Will Biden abandon Taiwan? So that's one question in this combination of questions. And the other one is asking, considering China's importance to Canada as a trading partner, how do you think Canada will balance the sort of security demands and influences of the US on the one hand, and our own economic interests on the other? Sweet, can I throw that out to you?
Sure. So if US decide don't have direct confrontation with China, I don't think they will make Taiwan a priority to them. They, this is, borderline, that's the boundary for the Chinese government. I see that as, former Chinese citizen grew up in China. And, if they don't have, direct confrontation, don't even mention about it. And I think they can just keep the status quo, but they definitely don't announce, this topic. And, I think for, trade with, I think the one thing with Biden situation that they could have a more, a better discussion and collaboration with Canada. And I think for the Trump administration, basically it's act on its own. And that create lots, create really difficult positions for Canada. And China is using this punishment policy, right? And the two micro issues, but I don't think Trump administration thought about that, the potential with consulting the Canadian government, think about the potential impact for the, for Canada. And what happened, to Canadian citizens get arrested, and they have no incentive to speak out, on behalf of Canadian government as that part of the negotiation. I think so for the Biden administration, things like this be less likely to happen. But I think it's important has the two governments as allies discuss, before they act, and make it I think stronger cooperations between the two countries, have standard policy to China rather than act on their own.
Other panelists want to jump in here?
Yeah, I would. I mean, China is my area of expertise. So this is, I think, a very interesting question. And I think Sweet's answer was very interesting. Clearly, a lot closer coordination between the two governments is needed. And I think that's exactly what President-elect Biden has signaled, and his whole career has shown that he is, willing to do and able to do. So I think we will see that. I think we have seen, with the China-Australia conflict right now, where China is trying to punish Australia by blocking its exports because Australia suggested that the origins of the COVID-19 virus should be investigated. I think it's a warning sign to some Chinese partners, and I think it also shows what happens when the U.S. basically is kind of out of the game. The U.S. now has tariffs 20% on 2/3 of its imports from China. It's shot a lot of its wad, so to speak. And so will it be able to get back into this game? I think when you see the Biden administration re-engaging strongly with the World Trade Organization, beginning again, bilateral, hopefully strategic and economic dialogue with China, we could see some realignment there that would start to take some of the pressure off of the large, but still not the major players like Canada, like Australia. So hopefully getting the US back in the game will push some pressure back on China. To go back to the Taiwan question, this is a very difficult issue. I think there's quite a bit of support within the Congress for Taiwan. I think it's a very, very difficult issue. It's one that I worry about. It's clear, as we said, that has enormous meaning for the Chinese. And it's one where I hope both governments are behave very, very carefully. So, but having said that, I think they both know it's probably a bridge too far. There's still awareness on both sides that there's a lot more to be gained in competing with each other, in cooperating with each other, for example, in the area of climate change and in the area of vaccine rollouts and financing for that. And lastly, I think decoupling. I think we will continue to see some decoupling. I think one of the problems that the Trump administration's policies have created for the rest of the world is that they've been like, one day it's going to be TikTok, then he forgets about TikTok, I think that there are security concerns on the rollout of 5G that are shared by many other governments. I think there are a lot of governments that are concerned about not just Chinese, also North Korean, Russian cyber attacks and cyber intrusions. So I think there are actually a lot of issues there that we share. And hopefully we'll be able to begin dialogues with the Chinese with a united front on those issues. That's my hope. And I think we have some clear signs that is, not just a pipe dream, that could happen.
Well, thank you so much for that. Oh, JC, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I kind of disagree. So I think Russia is a sideshow, and I think everyone in Washington are not really focused on this. I'm really looking at the couple of people around the Biden transition team on national defense, and a lot of them are actually China hawks. Kathleen Hicks, Mattis, and I've been quite vocal in expressing a notion that the Chinese are the next peer for the United States, and there needs to be some sort of greater strategy. I think it's not, so I think the Biden team is focusing, at least the blob and a lot of people in Washington are focusing on China, like whatever happens in Europe is like a sideshow. I think the way they're going to do it is differently. I think you're right. They're trying to manage the trade relationship and the security relationship in different ways, whereas the Trump administration kind of made them at the same time, and that made things complicated and fuzzy. From what I'm getting from the Washington people is that what the Biden administration are hoping to do is come back to the Asian pivot of the Obama team. And a strong part of that was reigniting, re-energizing their alliance relationship with Australia, with Japan, with South Korea, and kind of re-engaging with these allies in Asia and kind of, refocusing on this. And I'm kind of surprised how hawkish the group around the Trump administration on national defense are. I would have assumed that they would have been a lot more focused. Even went back to get Mattis from the Trump administration, which is, an interesting part. There's also like some people who are now in the transition team wrote a couple of foreign affairs papers, and that's how people get notice in Washington to get these positions. And some of them wrote really interesting arguments about how China and the US are into an ideological conflict. I don't know about that, but like making this the argument, it's not just about trade, it's about like ideology. And then here, I think Mary's right, like that focus on human rights and on democracy might get a lot of conflict with China, especially if the Biden administration are serious on that front. And that's going to be an interesting part. There's also a lot of arguments within the Biden team to reinvigorate the Navy and to find ways to make economies on national defense, but still fund the Navy. The data on the Navy now is that they want to build like 350 ships, and they want to put a lot of money toward that ship. And the only reason to do this thing is to be able to navigate more forcefully in the Pacific. And so at least at DoD, there is positioning and planning to kind of put this in play. And it seems like the Biden team, at least the people around them, will be a little bit more kind of like the Obama strategy was right. And we have to go back to these alliances. It's not clear what Canada can play, like what role. Like when I talk to the people in the Navy, they say like, Canada's responsibility in the Pacific is like, this high, because Alaska actually goes down all the way almost to Vancouver because we got screwed by the British, and as they traded off things. And so like to defend our Pacific coast is actually not that difficult. But my perception is that if the Americans are refocusing their weight in the Pacific, and we're asked to do a little bit more in the Pacific, that means some of our Navy and some of our engagement will be more and more in the Pacific. And in Canada, within foreign affairs and national defense, they're thinking about how they can reinvigorate and re-engage with Japan, for example, and South Korea and Thailand, and how they can make this relationship a little bit more stronger, because Canadians are not that good at the Asia game, and that's going to be an interesting future for the next couple of years.
Well,
I tried to be like, like at least, disagree.
We've got lots of disagreement, and I want to thank the panelists for bringing their expertise to this wide range of issues, and a special thanks to our audience for asking questions that got us started on some really interesting conversations. Now, this is the point in our event where we're going to pivot and go to our more relaxed Zoom room where people can be seen and can ask questions themselves. As a way of enticing you over, I'll tell you that there were a couple of really interesting hypothetical questions that we didn't get to. And I would love for us to be able to dig into those. One asked about, what we would expect out of a Kamala Harris administration if in fact Biden steps down. Another asked about what the reaction would be if Alberta votes to separate. So we've got lots of things still to talk about. So please join me in thanking our panelists. And then I've got special instructions to give you here. If you want to come over to us to the Pint part of our policy in a pint, you will find the link and password in the chat box. Once you get there, you'll be in a waiting room, so please give us a minute or two to let everyone in. If you can't stay on, thanks so much for joining us. And to learn more about the School of Public Policy's upcoming webinars, we've put the link here, policyschool.ca/webinars is right there in the chat, as is the link to the Zoom meeting and the passcode. So now is a really good time before you leave to copy that and then head on over. So thanks so much to our panelists, and we'll see you again in just a moment in our other room.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, everyone. So I'll try to jump on the other side.
Great.
Should we just leave the meeting?